Like, I wasn't used to the trauma of that you get during a wrestling match, and especially a wrestling match with Brock Lesnar. There's not a lot of people that pick me up and throw me around like he was able to.
The Undertaker warned us about Brock Lesnar, but nobody listened. For 30 years, Mark Calaway stood as the conscience of the WWE locker room. He judged, he protected, he enforced the code. Vince McMahon spent those same 30 years building a corporate empire through total commercial control. But here is the problem. In May 2026, the company is being dragged back toward full-time stars and story-driven television. The shift is not a choice, it is survival. The part-time mercenary blueprint left scar tissue everywhere. Undertaker saw it coming. He warned the office that building around an untouchable attraction would destroy morale and bury the stars of tomorrow. They handed Brock Lesnar a blank check anyway. If you are enjoying this breakdown, give hype to the video and let the algorithm know this story matters. So, how did it get this far? And who paid the price? Understanding what went wrong means understanding what Undertaker represented. The locker room was not just a place to change clothes. It was a culture. It was a brotherhood. It was a code passed down through generations of performers who understood that professional wrestling required more than athletic ability. It required trust. It required sacrifice. It required putting the business ahead of personal ambition. Undertaker ran this culture with old-school rules that seemed harsh to outsiders, but served a vital purpose for everyone inside. You respected your opponent in the ring and protected them during matches because their safety was your responsibility. You carried the brand most days of the year, grinding through hundreds of towns, performing hurt, missing birthdays and anniversaries because that was the job. You passed the torch when your time came instead of hoarding the spotlight because the business survived through generations, not individuals. Loyalty mattered more than money. The grind mattered more than comfort. Showing up mattered more than excuses. These were not suggestions. They were the foundation of everything. Wrestlers' Court existed to enforce those values and keep the culture intact. Undertaker sat as judge, presiding over trials that ranged from silly disputes to serious breaches of locker room protocol. If you disrespected a veteran or broke the unwritten code, you faced consequences. The Miz once spilled food on a veteran's bag during a flight. It sounds minor. It was not. He got shunned from the locker room and forced to change in hallways and bathroom stalls for weeks. The punishment taught him to respect communal spaces and the people who came before him. Melina faced trial early in her career for seeming aloof and failing to interact properly with established veterans. The court forced her to integrate and earn her place. Edge and Christian got accused of politicking and trying to bribe head writer Brian Gewirtz for extra television time. They brought Undertaker a bottle of Jack Daniels as penance, and the boys popped so hard that the case got thrown out amid laughter. Even the head writer himself had to stand trial alongside them to address locker room concerns that creative opportunities were being distributed based on personal friendships rather than merit and performance. The system worked because it applied to everyone. It kept the humble performers humble. It kept the pushed stars accountable. No matter how high you climbed the card, no matter how many championships you held, the locker room still mattered. You were still part of the collective. You still owed respect to your peers. Brock Lesnar never fit that culture. He was transactional from the very start. Clinical, detached, calculating, promoted as the next big thing. When he arrived in 2002, he rose faster than anyone in modern WWE history. He beat The Rock at SummerSlam to become the youngest WWE champion ever. He beat Hulk Hogan. He beat Undertaker himself. Within months, he became the undisputed focal point of the company's entire future. WWE invested massive financial capital and creative focus into making him the face of the next generation. Vince McMahon saw him as the ultimate physical specimen. Young, powerful, marketable, legitimate. The plan was for Brock to carry the company for the next 15 years. But the grind wore him down faster than anyone anticipated. The relentless travel schedule crushed him physically and mentally. Over 300 days a year on the road, flying from city to city, sleeping in hotels, performing through injuries, missing his family. The lifestyle that defined professional wrestling became unbearable for someone who had not grown up dreaming of this specific world. After WrestleMania 20 in 2004, Brock made his choice. He walked away from millions of dollars guaranteed. He walked away from the main event spotlight. He wanted to chase the NFL despite never playing college football. He wanted to explore other athletic paths. He wanted out of wrestling completely. The locker room erupted with resentment and fury. They felt deeply and personally betrayed. WWE had given him everything imaginable, the biggest push in company history, victories over every legend who mattered, the championship, the platform, the money, the opportunity, and he turned his back on the business without looking back. Most of the roster held severe, lasting heat toward him. They saw him as disloyal. They saw him as selfish. They saw him as someone who took everything the business offered and gave nothing back. Wrestlers who had ground for years to earn a fraction of what Brock was handed watched him abandon it all for uncertain pursuits. The bitterness was profound and widespread. Undertaker took a different stance that shocked many in the locker room. He pulled Brock aside privately and gave him pragmatic, almost fatherly advice. He told him to go. He told him to explore those dreams and athletic ambitions. He warned that if Brock did not chase the NFL and UFC opportunities while he was young enough, he would spend the rest of his life wondering what might have been. It was compassionate counsel from a man who understood the pull of ambition and the weight of regret. It let Brock leave without a personal grudge from the most respected figure in the company, but it also left a massive vacuum. Long-term booking strategies collapsed overnight. Plans that assumed Brock would anchor the main event for years had to be completely torn up. The creative disruption was enormous. The immediate fallout played out at WrestleMania 20 itself in front of the world. Brock faced Goldberg in what should have been a dream marquee match between two monsters. Both men were leaving the company. News of their departures leaked just before the show. The live crowd in Madison Square Garden gave them absolutely nuclear heat. Hostile, angry, bitter. They felt cheated by performers who were taking their money and walking away. The match turned into a complete disaster. Fans chanted for Stone Cold Steve Austin, who was serving as special referee instead of watching the competitors. They booed every single move. They rejected everything. The locker room watched backstage with a mixture of shock, amusement, and professional dismay. Industry figures like Jim Cornette privately warned Brock about the extreme level of hostility his sudden exit had generated among the active roster. Cornette emphasized that while nobody would risk a legitimate physical altercation with a combatant of Brock's size and skill, the underlying professional resentment was profound and would not fade quickly. Brock had burned bridges. He had violated the code. He had taken everything and given back nothing. The locker room would remember for years. 6 years passed. Brock pursued the NFL and failed to make a roster. He pursued UFC and succeeded beyond expectations. He became the UFC heavyweight champion. He became one of the biggest pay-per-view draws in mixed martial arts history. He proved he was a legitimate fighter, not just a sports entertainment performer. He validated his decision to leave, but he also proved something else that Undertaker had seen clearly. His loyalty was always to his own brand first. His commitment was always conditional. His dedication was always measured against other opportunities. In October 2010, everything shifted dramatically. At UFC 121, Brock lost his heavyweight title to Cain Velasquez in a brutal, one-sided beating. Afterwards, as Brock walked past a post-fight interview area, something unexpected happened. Undertaker was there. He was being interviewed by sports journalist Ariel Helwani. As Brock walked past, Undertaker stared him down with that legendary intensity. The words came out cold and clear and deliberate. "Do you want to do it?" The moment exploded instantly across both the MMA and wrestling worlds. Fans went absolutely wild. Social media erupted. It felt spontaneous. It felt real. It felt like two alpha males about to collide. Years later, the full truth came out through interviews and documentary. It was not spontaneous at all. WWE had specifically deployed Undertaker to pick a fight on Brock's current athletic home turf. The goal was simple and calculated. Lure him back to wrestling, create a spectacle, generate buzz, get him thinking about returning. Undertaker knew his own days of legitimately competing in an MMA cage had long passed. He was in his mid-40s. He had decades of accumulated wrestling injuries, but he recognized the immense commercial potential of leveraging their shared history to create cross-promotional interest and plant the seed. The plan had one significant operational problem. Undertaker operated under the explicit assumption that Vince McMahon and UFC President Dana White had prearranged the confrontation together as promotional partners. They had not. Dana White was completely unaware of the planned interaction. He knew nothing about it. Undertaker felt deeply apologetic afterward for crossing that operational boundary and putting Dana in an awkward position with his own fighter. The professional relationship could have been damaged, but despite the administrative awkwardness, bias and miscommunication, the gambit succeeded perfectly. The chain of events it started led directly to Brock's return to WWE in 2012. This time, he came back with leverage that no returning performer had ever possessed. The structural and cultural breaking point came at WrestleMania 30. The streak had stood for over 2 decades as a sacred institution. 21 victories and 0 defeats. It was an unofficial main event every single year. It was a respected tradition that transcended normal booking. It drove ticket sales. It anchored WrestleMania marketing. Fans traveled across the world specifically to see if someone would finally end it. On April 6, 2014, Undertaker arrived at the Superdome in New Orleans expecting to defeat Brock Lesnar and extend the streak to 22-0. 4 hours before showtime, Vince McMahon called him aside and changed the finish. Brock would end the streak. Undertaker did not veto the decision, despite having the backstage power and respect to do so. His professional philosophy had always been clear and consistent. Business considerations must supersede personal desires and legacy protection. He had put countless people over during his career. He had done jobs when asked. He trusted Vince's judgment on big-picture creative decisions. But he asked Vince one direct question before agreeing. "Are you absolutely certain about this?" Vince said yes without hesitation. He argued forcefully that if not Brock, there was nobody on the current active roster who was believable enough to accomplish the feat. Nobody had the credibility. Nobody had the aura. Nobody else could make it mean something significant. Undertaker accepted the decision, but privately harbored serious reservations. He thought a full-time rising star like Roman Reigns would benefit far more from receiving that monumental rub. Roman was young. Roman was being positioned as the next face of the company. Roman needed the credibility and the moment. Giving the streak to Brock felt like using the most valuable currency in the business to buy something you already owned. Brock was already established. Brock was already a legend. Brock was already made. The streak would not fundamentally change his career trajectory. It would just be another accolade. But for a young, full-time star trying to break through to the main event level, it could be career-defining and transformative. The match went ahead as planned. During it, Undertaker suffered a severe concussion that left him disoriented and struggling. He was hospitalized immediately after the match finished. Vince McMahon left WrestleMania before the show ended to accompany his longtime star to the hospital. Meanwhile, the locker room reaction backstage was a mixture of genuine shock, fury, and professional dismay. Most of the guys were absolutely pissed. They could not believe what they had just witnessed. They felt a vital and irreplaceable part of WrestleMania tradition had been destroyed for no good reason. The performers who had helped build the streak over the years by putting Undertaker over felt personally disrespected. They had all done their part to make it special. They had all contributed to making it mean something. And now it was gone. Given to someone who was not even there full time. Given to someone who had already abandoned them once before. The executive logic behind the decision tied directly to creative chaos elsewhere on the WrestleMania card. Originally, WWE had built the entire WrestleMania 30 season and storyline around the return of Batista. He was supposed to win the Royal Rumble. He was supposed to challenge for the WWE Championship in the main event. He was supposed to leave WrestleMania as champion and carry the company forward. But fan support for Daniel Bryan exploded into a movement that could not be controlled or redirected. The Yes movement became a genuine cultural phenomenon. Fans hijacked shows. They chanted for Bryan constantly and relentlessly. They completely rejected the Batista plan. The company had no choice but to restructure everything at the absolute last minute. Vince decided if Daniel Bryan was going to leave WrestleMania as WWE champion, after forcing that creative change, then Brock Lesnar needed to be elevated to an unassailable level of dominance to balance the scales and anchor the other side of the card. Ending the streak would create that instantly. It would make Brock absolutely unstoppable. It would make him the ultimate heel force. The financial implications were staggering. The streak had been leveraged for merchandise, ticket sales, and WrestleMania branding for over 20 years. It had generated countless millions in revenue. Fans bought tickets specifically to witness history continue. They purchased commemorative programs. They bought streak-themed merchandise. The economic value was immense and proven. Ending it created a one-time shocking moment. Preserving it would have continued generating value indefinitely. But Vince believed the shock value outweighed the long-term equity. He believed creating an unstoppable monster was worth more than maintaining tradition. History would prove that calculation wrong. The legendary streak's value as an ongoing attraction far exceeded its value as a sacrifice to elevate someone who did not need elevating. The plan was for Brock to defeat Bryan later that summer in a massacre-style match that would cement Brock as the towering villain to anchor the main event scene for years. On paper, the corporate logic made perfect sense. In practice, it violated the most fundamental locker room rule that everyone understood. Use the streak to raise a full-time star who desperately needs it. Give it to someone who is building their career and legacy. Do not waste it on someone who is already made and works part-time. Giving it to Brock felt like throwing away the single most valuable piece of capital the company possessed. But Vince was certain, so it happened. What followed was a full decade of systematic damage to the full-time roster and the championship structure. SummerSlam 2014 arrived just 4 months after WrestleMania. Brock faced John Cena for the WWE Championship. The match was not a competitive back-and-forth battle. It was a mechanical demolition. Suplex after suplex after suplex. 16 German suplexes in total. Cena, the company's top star and absolute workhorse for nearly a decade, got completely destroyed. He barely got any offensive moves. He was made to look utterly helpless against Brock's dominance. Brock won the title decisively and became WWE champion. Then he disappeared from television. He worked an absolutely tiny fraction of the dates that previous champions had worked. The championship became an invisible prop that fans rarely saw. It vanished from television for weeks or even months at a time. Full-time performers fought desperately for Intercontinental Championships and United States Championships, while the top prize in the entire company was held hostage by someone who appeared once every few weeks at absolute best. The class divide became completely undeniable and increasingly toxic. Brock's contract was estimated at $12 million annually according to industry reports. Additional reports suggested he earned approximately $167,000 per individual television appearance and $650,000 per pay-per-view match. Add in substantial merchandise revenue shares on top of those appearance fees. Meanwhile, full-time talent carried the absolutely brutal daily touring burden. They worked hundreds of live events every single year. They traveled constantly from city to city and country to country. They performed through injuries that should have required surgery and recovery time. They missed family weddings, birthdays, anniversaries, and countless other life events. They did absolutely everything the business demanded without complaint or hesitation, and they earned a small fraction of what Brock made for his occasional appearances. They were told explicitly through that compensation structure that their dedication and presence meant less than his sporadic involvement. The message absolutely destroyed morale across the entire roster. The human cost played out in genuinely heartbreaking fashion again and again. Kofi Kingston spent over a decade as an incredibly loyal, hard-working performer. He was a true workhorse who never complained about his position. He took every loss professionally. He did every job he was asked to do. He worked every single town on the schedule. He was a locker room leader who actively helped younger talent develop. He was beloved by peers and fans alike for his infectious positivity and relentless work ethic. In early 2019, fan support for him exploded organically into a genuine movement. The Kofi Mania phenomenon became absolutely real and undeniable. Fans demanded he get a WWE Championship opportunity. Social media erupted with support. Arenas chanted his name constantly. WWE finally listened. At WrestleMania 35, Kofi defeated Daniel Bryan to win the WWE Championship in an emotional, genuinely cathartic moment. It felt completely and authentically earned. It felt real in a way very few moments do. 6 months later, SmackDown debuted on the Fox network. WWE desperately wanted a shocking mainstream moment to grab headlines, attract casual viewers, and generate social media buzz. They wanted something that would trend immediately. They booked Kofi to defend his WWE Championship against Brock Lesnar on that debut episode. The match lasted exactly 7 seconds. 7 seconds to completely erase 6 months of championship reign and 11 full years of grinding and dedication. Brock hit one F5 finishing move and pinned him cleanly. The championship that Kofi had carried with genuine pride and honor for months was gone in an instant. The months of careful storytelling investment were erased. The emotional payoff was demolished. The locker room was absolutely devastated by what they witnessed. Peers did not blame Brock personally for simply executing what he was told to do. They understood he was following orders and collecting his contracted pay. But they blamed the creative decision with absolute fury. They felt months of careful storytelling and over a decade of loyal, grinding work ethic had been casually dismissed and thrown away for a brief ratings pop that would be completely forgotten within days. The short-sightedness was staggering. Prominent tag team wrestlers immediately sent private messages of apology apology and support to Kofi. It reflected collective grief and anger across the entire roster. The championship itself felt devalued as an institution. The title that should represent the absolute pinnacle of professional achievement felt cheapened. The message to everyone watching backstage was brutal and crystal clear. No amount of dedication can ultimately protect you from being sacrificed. No amount of fan connection or organic support truly matters when corporate priorities suddenly shift. If Vince wants a shocking moment, your reign ends instantly to service that goal. Braun Strowman suffered an equally damaging parallel fate. By 2017, he had emerged as a genuinely homegrown giant with real organic crowd momentum. Fans absolutely loved watching him flip ambulances and destroy everything in his path. He had natural charisma. He had genuine presence. He felt like an obvious natural successor to Brock as an unstoppable monster. At No Mercy 2017, Braun faced Brock for the Universal Championship. The match ended relatively quickly with Brock winning decisively. It dampened Braun's immediate appeal but did not completely kill his momentum. The truly critical failure came exactly 1 year later. At Crown Jewel 2018, a match was scheduled to crown a new Universal Champion because Roman Reigns had vacated the title due to his leukemia diagnosis. The creative writing staff was told explicitly and repeatedly that Braun Strowman was winning the championship. They wrote the entire next episode of Monday Night Raw around that. Then Vince reversed it and put the title on Brock. The writers scrambled to rewrite everything. Braun never captured the title at his peak. His trajectory was permanently altered. The Braun situation exposed another fundamental flaw in the system. The company could not commit to building new stars because they were too dependent on the established attraction. Every time a new star started gaining traction, the instinct was to feed them to Brock rather than elevate them past him. This created a ceiling that nobody could break through. Braun was the most obvious example, but the pattern repeated with others. The system was structurally designed to prevent new megastars from emerging. It protected the status quo at the expense of the future. WWE became trapped in their own creation. The pattern repeated itself across the roster in different forms. Momentum got arbitrarily halted. Carefully constructed, long-term plans got suddenly scrapped to accommodate short-term Brock angles. Last-minute, creative rewrites became accepted as completely normal operating procedure. Creative teams grew increasingly frustrated with the chaos and instability. Full-time performers grew progressively more bitter and disillusioned with the entire system. The locker room culture that Undertaker had spent decades building and protecting continued to erode steadily. All of it was done to maintain Brock's carefully constructed aura as the unstoppable final boss who existed completely above everyone else. The contractual gap between Brock and everyone else told the entire story in stark numerical terms. Brock worked strictly limited part-time dates. Over a full 10-year span from 2012 to 2022, he wrestled only 63 televised matches total, 63 matches in 10 full years. Full-time performers worked that many matches in just 3 or 4 months of regular touring. They did year-round domestic tours covering every market. They did international tours. They worked live events in front of small crowds that would never be televised or generate pay-per-view revenue. They put their bodies through absolute hell night after night. Brock was completely exempt from all of it. He was also completely exempt from standard backstage disciplinary channels and accountability. He had almost no presence whatsoever in the day-to-day locker room environment. He flew in specifically for shows and left immediately afterward. He was not there for the grinding travel. He was not there for the camaraderie and bonding. He was not there for the culture. He was completely immune to the peer-led accountability system that Undertaker had spent his entire career enforcing and protecting. He had high-level booking veto power that let him protect himself creatively in ways nobody else on the roster could even dream of. He frequently ended full-time stars' momentum to keep his own position absolutely secure and untouchable. Meanwhile, the active roster was constantly subject to rapid creative changes and unceremonious losses with absolutely no ability to push back or protect themselves. They had zero protection. The system created two completely distinct classes: part-time aristocracy floating above. The psychological impact on the locker room cannot be overstated. Imagine working 300 days per year, sacrificing your body and family time, doing everything asked professionally, and watching someone work 30 days while earning 10 times your salary. Imagine being told you are not worthy, but the part-timer who already left is. Imagine building momentum with fans, connecting authentically, generating organic reactions, then having that momentum killed to protect someone who barely shows up. That psychological damage compounds over time. It breeds resentment and kills passion. It makes people question why they sacrifice so much for a business that values them so little. The numbers and emotions told the story. Full-time trench workers grinding below. Wrestlers Court as an institution could not touch Brock at all. The system that had kept even the biggest pushed stars humble and accountable to their peers had absolutely no power over him. When Vince said only Brock was worthy enough to end the streak, he sent a devastating message to the entire full-time roster. He told them explicitly they were sub-elite. He told them they fundamentally lacked the inherent star power and credibility of previous generations. He told them they would never truly measure up, no matter how hard they worked. The active roster had to watch a man who had once completely abandoned the company return years later to claim its ultimate narrative prize while remaining totally detached from all the social obligations and codes of the locker room. The traditional locker room hierarchy eroded completely. A community that had been built on generations of shared labor and mutual respect gave way to a cold, corporate, mercenary ecosystem dominated entirely by special treatment and exceptionalism. The irony of Undertaker's personal role in all of this cuts extraordinarily deep when examined closely. In 2004, he gave Brock compassionate, fatherly advice to walk away and pursue his dreams to avoid a lifetime of regret. In 2010, he actively allowed himself to be used as promotional bait at UFC 121 to strategically lure Brock back to wrestling. In 2014, he consented to the streak ending and professionally put Brock over on the biggest possible stage. Each individual decision made perfect sense when viewed in isolation. Each decision reflected Undertaker's deep professionalism and his consistent willingness to put business considerations first. But when viewed together as a connected sequence, those three decisions helped directly construct a system that fundamentally compromised the very locker room culture Undertaker had protected and enforced for 3 full decades. The decision to deliberately build WWE's entire creative philosophy around a part-time, highly compensated attraction permanently altered how the company operated at every level. It systematically devalued active championships by making them completely invisible for long stretches of time. It decimated the momentum of organic, full-time rising stars like Kofi Kingston and Braun Strowman, who absolutely should have become the next generation of megastars. It replaced the traditional peer-led accountability system of Wrestlers Court with an untouchable class of mercenary performers who answered to nobody except Vince personally. In his genuine effort to help secure a singular attraction for the business and support the company's success, the single greatest locker room leader in WWE history inadvertently paved the way for a structural paradigm that systematically diminished the value of the full-time roster and left lasting, visible damage across the entire industry. The creative monotony became absolutely suffocating for everyone involved in the process. The exact same blueprint repeated endlessly for years. Brock shows up occasionally. Brock dominates completely. Brock disappears for months. The championship vanishes from television. Full-time performers desperately fight for mid-card scraps. The cycle repeats without variation. Audiences gradually grew tired of the predictable pattern. Ratings reflected the mounting fatigue. The locker room grew increasingly bitter about the situation. The damage compounded steadily, year after year. Stars who absolutely should have been systematically built were instead sacrificed to maintain the status quo. Opportunities that could have created genuine new mainstream icons were completely wasted on endlessly repeating the same Brock formula. The product stagnated creative. Viewership declined steadily. The company kept stubbornly doubling down on the same approach anyway. They kept believing the mercenary model was sustainable even as mounting evidence proved it was fundamentally not. They kept deliberately ignoring what Undertaker had clearly seen from the very beginning. Relying on someone whose loyalty was purely conditional and who actively wanted out of the grinding lifestyle was fundamentally unstable. Building creative entirely around someone who was completely untouchable by normal locker room standards and accountability was deeply corrosive to culture. Sacrificing the long-term systematic development of the future for the short-term appeal of a temporary attraction was strategically short-sighted. The scar tissue from that entire era runs extraordinarily deep, even now in 2026. An entire generation of talented performers saw their absolute primes disrupted and their potential potential artificially capped. Wrestlers who could have and absolutely should have become genuine megastars got permanently caught in the holding pattern created by Brock's extended absences and dominance. The championship belt that should have systematically elevated multiple new stars became nothing more than a prop for someone who barely appeared on television. The story of Undertaker and Brock Lesnar is ultimately a story about choices and their consequences, about warnings that were ignored and prices that were paid, about culture that was eroded and is now being slowly rebuilt, about the real cost of prioritizing mercenaries over the full-time grind, about learning lessons the hardest possible way, about scar tissue that remains even after healing begins. It is a story about how the greatest locker room leader in WWE history warned everyone about the structural rot that was coming, how he saw the damage clearly before it happened, how he tried in his way to prevent it, and how he ended up helping create it anyway through decisions that seemed right at the time but proved catastrophic in combination. The May 2026 shift back toward full-time stars as the Foundation proves he was right from the start. The part-time mercenary blueprint failed. The damage it caused was real and measurable. The years it cost cannot be recovered, but the lesson has finally been learned. The company is rebuilding properly now. It is investing in full-time talent. It is respecting the grind. It is creating sustainable culture again. It is building stars the right way. The future looks brighter specifically because the past taught such a painful lesson. Undertaker warned us about Brock Lesnar and what building around him would cost. Nobody listened. 10 years later, everyone finally understands why they should have. The warning was real. The damage was predictable. The lesson was painful, but it has finally been learned. If you made it this far, hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into wrestling history. Drop a comment below with your take. Should the streak have stayed intact, or should it have been used to raise a full-time hero like Roman Reigns instead? The debate still matters because the lesson still resonates. Thanks for watching.